I think they've kind of covered my sermon, so stole my thunder. Our scripture today comes from the book of Daniel, chapter 7. It's on page 1383 in your pew Bibles. We'll go until verse 8 through verse 18 today. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was laying on his bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there were before me the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. When I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow, the hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words that the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the true meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The 4 great beasts are 4 kingdoms that will arise from the earth, but the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. In the movie The Godfather, the big mafia boss commands all kinds of brutal things, seemingly to keep his power and to get rich for his family. His son, Michael, was the heir to the whole business and is always insisting that he's not his father. He's one of the good ones, and that when he gets control of the family mob, things will be different. But as his father ages, Michael had to take a bigger role in the family business. That would seem like a good thing. Maybe Michael can lead the mafia to the point that it doesn't rely on violence and bloodshed so much. But out of necessity, he has to make some shady deals to protect his aging father. Then he feels like he has to order some murders, and by the end of the movie, it's clear that he's simply just become his father again. That he thought that he thought that he could be different from his father. He thought that he wouldn't be a brutal leader that would command all kinds of bloodshed. But the moment that he took power, once he took his seat in his father's chair, Michael was convinced by the necessity of violence. We have to kill our enemies, or they will kill us. We have to protect the family. So one shady deal after another, he is shaped to be someone he never thought that he could be. Until the role of the mob boss begins to take on a life of its own that swallows him whole. There is no longer Michael, there is only the mob boss. He was no longer making the decisions, the mafia was. He might have been the leader of the mafia, but he was not actually in control of the mafia. He never felt like he was in control. He never felt like he was the one making the decisions. He was only reacting in what seemed like the obvious and only possible way. No human person was in control. The mafia was. In John Steinbeck's book, The Grapes of Wrath, he describes a conversation between a banker and someone he's foreclosing on during the Great Depression. The poor man is going to be homeless, and the banker, nevertheless, feels like he has no choice. The banker has to foreclose for reasons even he doesn't fully understand. And here's how he describes the situation. We're sorry, it's not us. In other words, we're not making the decision. It's the monster. The bank isn't like a man. Yes, but the bank is only made of men. No, you're wrong there. Quite wrong there. The bank is something else than men. It happens that every man in a bank hates what the bank does, and yet the bank does it. The bank is something more than men, I tell you. It's a monster. Men made it, but they can't control it. You see, so often, especially when you're in a leader or you're in a position of power, you would think that you have far more power and far more control than anyone else around you does. You would think that you have the ability to reshape the institution that you're leading, to turn it around for good purposes. But most of the time, when you begin to sit in the seat of power, you find that the decisions somehow are already made for you. You never really feel like you have a choice. Even perhaps the President of the United States of America, for decades the most powerful man in the whole world, probably feels like this most of the time. And that's not just the president today, but every president ever. They probably feel like this. I want to do this thing, but these lobbyists wouldn't be happy. Or perhaps this special interest group wouldn't be happy, and I wouldn't be able to stay president. So even if it's the right thing to do, even if it's just, I cannot do it. I want to have peace, but it feels like war is an absolute necessity. There's no choice. I have to do it. See, nobody can actually lead alone. Nobody really calls all the shots themselves. From the pastor of a church of 20-some people to the leader of the free world. Our institutions have a tendency to take on a life of their own and call the shots for us. If you've ever led something, you've probably come to a kind of similar conclusion. But if you're the leader, if you're the one in charge, if there's no one above your head telling you what to do, then, well, who is? Especially when it comes to the most terrible mistakes and atrocities that humans can commit. Most of them were committed because they didn't feel like they had a choice. There's no other option. When terrible sins are committed by huge empires and countries and institutions and churches even, we want to know who to hold accountable. If the leaders aren't calling the shots, if the people under the leaders aren't calling the shots either, if no one seems to be making actual decisions, if no one actually feels like they're in control, then who do we blame when everything goes wrong? How do we make sure that the next person won't just do the same thing the moment they sit in the leader's chair? After all, they won't feel like they're in control either. See, this is the kind of question that a lot of people were asking around this time when Israel was in exile, and around the time that the book of Daniel was set. See, they were brutalized. They were treated terribly. They were deported away from their promised homeland. They were beaten, killed, and humiliated. And so you think, man, when I get to Babylon, it's going to be a lawless wasteland. If this is what they're doing out here, then surely that's what they're doing back there. There's going to be nothing but robbing, stealing, and killing all around me. These are bad people, and the world they live in must be terrible. But then, I imagine, they arrive in their new life in Babylon, and they find, to their surprise, that probably a good many people who had just been treating them so terribly begin to actually treat them quite nicely. They act like decent neighbors, the kind of people you're totally fine with living around. You find that it's not impossible to live in peace in Babylon. They seem like normal people. But how in the world did that happen? How in the world can a person be so profoundly evil one moment and downright pleasant the next? What came over them? It's a question that's been asked so many times, especially in the 20th century with all these terrible atrocities that happened, and they seem like normal people that committed them. This passage gives an answer to all of these questions. It actually is something like the point of the genre of apocalypse. See, the word apocalypse, which is what Daniel is, at least at this point in the book, means revelation in Greek. And the most famous apocalyptic work in the Bible, of course, is the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse of John. Now, because of Revelation, we often associate apocalypse entirely with the end times. Even the word apocalypse means like the end of the world, right? And so we think that the point of apocalypse is to tell us what's going to happen at the end of the world. And certainly some apocalyptic literature does do that. But the real point is instead to reveal the hidden order of creation. That is actually what the word apocalypse means, to reveal. To show, in a sense, what is happening under the hood of the world. I was driving and my car wasn't working and I needed to know what was happening under the hood to know why it wasn't working, right? And though some apocalyptic does talk about the end of the world, the genre is meant to show us what's under the hood at any point in the past, present, or future. It's not just about the future. Us humans can only see what's in front of us, what we can see and feel and touch. But the point of apocalypse is to reveal to us the hidden battle that is happening behind the scenes of creation. It shows us those spirits and beasts and demons that pull the strings in the background. And when we come to a place of power and recognize that even the people who are supposed to be in charge aren't really in charge, Revelation or Apocalypse shows us who really is. It shows us what leads someone like Michael Corleone, seemingly a good guy, to become a mob boss, and what makes it so that your perfectly pleasant Babylonian neighbor can nevertheless be activated to kill, pillage, and destroy. And it shows us the monster that controls the bank in the grapes of wrath that forecloses on a farmer that's been living on the farm for generations. In fact, the book of Daniel describes it almost exactly how the grapes of wrath does. See, a few chapters back in chapter 2, it described the great empires of the earth that would rule over the Jews for the next 500 years as one giant statue. These empires might look different, they might act slightly different, but where they count, they're all just one big thing. It's big and imposing, but ultimately it's just a statue that stands still. You can stand up to the statue and it will fall down. In the end, it is destroyed by a moving, falling boulder that is the kingdom of Jesus Christ. But now Daniel describes these same great empires as something else, something far more sinister and active. John Steinbeck calls it a monster, and Daniel calls them beasts. If you know your history well enough, it's not so hard to identify who these beasts are in the book of Daniel. The first beast is the kingdom of Babylon. The second beast is the kingdom of Media. The third is Persia. And the fourth is the Greek kingdom of Alexander the Great. Now, these are the four great empires that ruled over Israel from about 600 BC to 150 BC. Here, the apocalyptic story is revealing the hidden order of the next 500 years of the Middle East. It's giving a rough outline of everything that is happening in Israel. But the point of apocalyptic isn't so much to focus on what it predicts as to how it predicts it, how it describes it. The point is to get a God's eye view of how it describes what it looks like. And the key to understanding this passage is that this never describes any individual king. See, there are some really great kings in this big list of beasts. There's Nebuchadnezzar, there's Alexander the Great, there's Cyrus the Persian. It never says there's this huge guy named Alexander the Great who's like super powerful. He's going to have he's going to be this great, huge general that defeats all the armies in the known world. Instead, at best, and this is key, the human kings of the earth are no more than horns on the heads of these great beasts. The beast of Greece has 10 horns for the 10 kings that ruled over Israel. But notice that these are not 10 beasts, but only 10 horns. The horns do not control the beast. The kings do not control the empires. The empires, the beasts, have taken on a life of their own. They are full of people who don't think they have a choice. They think they have to choose violence. They think they have to steal. They think they have to commit atrocities. There is no choice. They aren't in control. The beast is. The empire is. But finally, God, the Ancient of Days, defeats the beasts and sits down in judgment over them, and anyone who attaches themselves to the beasts. And he hands over dominion to one who looked like a son of man. And notice that is what Jesus called himself on earth, echoing this passage. He is the Son of Man, and his rule is different from the rule of the beasts. Jesus does not try to take control over the earth. Instead, he receives control from God. And behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. He didn't take control with violence. He received control from God. He trusts in God to give him control. And he doesn't use violence or economics or all kinds of methods of control to take it. Instead, he simply receives control from God. Because, after all, and this is the key, this is how the beasts are formed. Violence, after all, the ways we take control so often begin to control us. Violence begets more violence and becomes a beast that enslaves us. We had to fight this person, which means that we need to fight this person, and so on forever. It never ends. Money forces us to make more money, which eventually enslaves us. When we put our trust in some method of control and not in God, we find that it takes on a life of its own apart from us and apart from God. It enslaves us. The only escape is simply to trust God and not our own schemes. See, beasts are ways of maintaining order that have rebelled against God. See, order is a good thing. It's a thing that God has ordained, and he has given us certain wonderful gifts in the world so we can experience them with joy and thankfulness. But because we love the gifts that God gives us so much and not the God who gave it to us, because they are so important to us, we can forget the one that created them. We can worship the thing that God gives us rather than the God who gave them to us. When that happens, these things cease to be good gifts of God, and they become, like in Daniel 2, dead statues, or even worse in Daniel 7, beasts. See, they can take on a life of their own, and these things can take a demonic life of their own apart from God. And anything that's created entirely apart from God is going to begin to look demonic. And they become almost full-blown human creations, and having created them, they enslave us. Eventually, the beasts begin to rule us, and they primarily rule us based on fear. See, what terrible thing is going to happen to me if I don't serve this beast with all my heart and all my soul? We make fun of the Israelites who build a golden calf themselves in the desert and then bow down and worshiped it, and even prostrate themselves to it and enslave themselves to it. But we do the same thing all the time with all of our human creations that we worship and that ultimately take control of us. In fact, one of the best ways that you know that you're looking at a beast is that it threatens you. It tells you you don't have a choice, that the result of not serving the beast will be unthinkable. If I speak up, then everyone will hate me. I have no choice. I have to stay silent. If we don't go to war, we'll all die. We don't have a choice. If I work less, I won't know who I am. I have no choice. I have to keep going. There's no other alternative. And when you hear yourself thinking that way, consider that maybe it's not you, but the beast talking. The beast is trying to take control. One of the points that Jesus makes in the Gospels is that even the greatest of gifts that God gives us, even the Torah, the law that God gave Israel, is as the revelation of God's will and wisdom, had become a beast, a monster. People had begun to worship and serve the Torah itself as slaves, and the Torah itself began to take on a life of its own apart from God. The Torah was meant to free Israel from its sins, to free Israel from foreign gods and from the lack of discipline that would tear apart its communities. But the Torah began to take a life of its own and began to be a tyrant. People didn't take care of their parents because they needed to make vows to the temple that the Torah told them to do. People used the Torah to signal how wonderful they were, tithing the least little sprig of mint to show everyone else that they really loved God. It became a way to praise yourself and not your Creator. The Torah took on a life of its own, and it enslaved the people of Israel. After all, what would you do if your neighbor saw you doing something that could be considered work on the Sabbath? What would you do if you helped a poor man on the road and so could be considered unclean for a while? What would your neighbors think if you shared a meal with an outsider to Israel? And eventually, the reasons you do what the Torah says becomes totally disconnected from anything good. It becomes disconnected even from wanting the approval of your friends and family. The Torah, for these early Jews, had certainly stopped having anything to do with God at all. The Torah begins to run on nothing but fear. The Torah was meant to change the people so they could love God more. That was the purpose. The Torah was meant to be the way that the people would demonstrate the love and righteousness of God. But the Torah became a beast and a tyrant. In the stories of the Good Samaritans and one like it, the Torah actively got in the way of the love and righteousness of God. It took on a life of its own apart from God and became a tyrant. See, beasts begin as good, even necessary things. Even these beasts in Daniel started out as good. Imagine being a Babylonian in 600 BC and banding together with your friends and countrymen to liberate yourselves from the Assyrian Empire. That sounds pretty good. And then you realize how proud you are of your people, your ethnicity, your family, your community. Yes, that is wonderful and healthy. You even begin to think that your people are truly great. You are proud of your habits as a people and your culture and the stories you tell and everything. It's wonderful. But then as a Babylonian, you begin to see your people as better than all the other people. You miss the days when you are at war, and you felt a togetherness with your friends and family that you don't have as much during peacetime. You want to demonstrate how much better you are than all the other people through war. And you want to bring home prosperity and wealth for your friends and your family. In fact, perhaps your economy is dependent on that wealth that comes from the war. And all of a sudden, you have taken the good gift of a common culture and a people and an ethnicity and togetherness that God gave you, and you've warped it. You've given it a new life entirely apart from God. But it gets worse. Because over time, your motivations become totally disconnected from the good thing that God gave you. Because eventually you start going to war, not out of pride or a love of your country, but out of fear of this or that nation on your borders that gets a little big for its britches, might threaten everything you've built. The war now ends up being just for the sake of more war. This wonderful empire you've built has become an albatross around your neck, and it's everything you can do just to keep it. The beast takes a life of its own, and you don't serve it for anything actually good, but out of nothing but fear. You have to serve it. We have no choice. And it doesn't just destroy you, it destroys everyone around you. One country after another, thousands and thousands of people get pulled into the work of the beast. What God meant for good, we have turned for evil. See, money is a good thing. Think about how hard it would be if every time we had some good or service to provide, we not only had to find someone who needs it, but had to find someone who has something that we want ourselves. That's what life would be like without money. Whenever I go to the grocery store, I'd have to ask everyone there, hey, do you need some spiritual guidance? I'll take your food with that, right? Or, okay, do you need help with the SAT? No? Okay, I guess I can't eat today, right? That's life without money. And if I can't find anyone who needs either of those things, I'm not going to eat that night. But with money, I can just trade those things, my spiritual guidance and my SAT tutoring for money, and then that money is something that everyone needs more of, so I can trade that money for food. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful invention, a good gift of God, kind of a miracle. But that's all it is. That's all money is. It's a method of exchange. But I don't need to tell you that money can become a beast. At first, money is a nifty way to exchange stuff you have for stuff you need without having to make 18-way trades at the grocery store. You store up all kinds of money for yourself, and maybe if you're wealthy, you do it with no actual plans to use it. It's just a matter of running up the score. Or even worse, you become trapped. Because not only are you making money, but your money is making money with interest and dividends and capital gains. It's great. A wonderful thing that you can save your money for later and have more money later on. But if you start using your money at all, you start dipping into savings. And when that happens, your money stops making money, and your money stops making interest and dividends and capital gains, and you can't have that. So eventually, you don't even spend your money at all, and you become a slave to your money. You worship your money. Your entire life becomes about making as much as possible and spending as little as possible so that your money can make more money. Or perhaps, right, you start making enough money that you can treat yourself to something more, right? And you treat yourself more and more, and then you find that you've just been on a treadmill this entire time. You've never actually gotten ahead, right? There's so many different ways that money can become a beast for us. What if the market goes down? What if some catastrophe happens and all the money I worked for is gone? What if I have to dip into my savings, which is, after all, what savings is there for in the first place? Eventually, you've forgotten what money even is. You've forgotten that it's a middleman, a way of trading stuff you have for stuff you need. You have none of the good things that money is supposed to give you, and all kinds of other bad things besides. You are filled with fear. Money was supposed to give you power. You'd think more money means you have more control, but often it doesn't. Money becomes a beast. It takes on a life of its own apart from God. You are not in control any longer. The money is. This is why the book of Proverbs tells us not to be envious of those who have a lot of power and control. Because so often, even though they look like they're in control, even though they look like they're the ones making the decisions and they're in charge, they're really not. The things they have trusted in have taken control of them, and they no longer feel like they are actually making choices. Even our very church can become a beast. Our very church, which really is a wonderful gift, a community of people who love and serve God together and love one another. But sometimes the church, as an institution, can take on a life of its own and begin to make the decisions for us. We have to have these outreach events, and they have to go perfectly, or the church will close down. We have to clean up our property, or no one will want to come here, and the church will close down. We have to find young people to be part of the church, or the church will close down. And you see how much anxiety and fear comes into play, and how little God comes into play. You see how we feel like we often don't have a choice. We get mad at each other. We burn down bridges with each other. We give up on the peace of God and the loving family that God has given us out of fear of the church closing down. As if the church closing down is the unthinkable end of our lives, as if the purposes of God could not be accomplished unless Drainsville Church of the Brethren is still standing right here on the spot. And so we don't think we have a choice. We have to get mad at each other. We have to insist on our own way, because only my way will actually save the church. Because if we don't, it's all over. The church will close down. But see, if we try to take control of the church will take on a life of its own and enslave us. This good gift of God that God has given us, it's a good thing. But when we trust in the church, when we make that the goal and not God himself, it will enslave us. It will become a beast. The only way forward in any area of life, whether with your money or your power or your friendships or your church, is simply to trust God with them like Jesus did. To receive them like Jesus did as a gift of God, and not to try to take control with them. A gift of God that he could take away at any moment, and we could trust that God would still take care of us anyway. Because after all, we're going to serve somebody. We're going to serve the beast, or we're going to serve God. But the beast will enslave us, and God will set us free. We asked, what will I do unless I serve this beast? Who will protect me if not this beast? Who am I without this beast? The only answer is to stop giving them our trust and instead to trust in God, to receive his gifts and to hold them lightly, to simply obey him, not to try to assert your will over this world out of fear, but to just do the very next thing that God wants you to do, and to not plan too far ahead, but simply to leave the results up to God. Let's pray. Great God, we want to obey, but we are anxious and fearful. These beasts have told us that our ruin is coming if we do not serve them, and so it is difficult for us to trust in you. So, Lord, reassure us of your love for us and the way that even your own Son died for us, seemed to have lost for us, who faced the beasts and allowed the beast to kill him, so that we could be freed to love and serve you as we follow you alone and not any method of control. We pray this in your name. Amen.